Hello, everybody. This is Empowering Democracy,
Good to be here.
and I'm here with my friend Dee Piers. I'm your host, Joe Firestone.
I'm
Our top,
happy to be joining you.
well, thank you, Dee. And our topics for tonight are Trump's picks for the foreign policy area. Also, is Turkey gone? Because Turkey broke its diplomatic relationships, okay, with Israel. Also, can Tulsi do it?
I'm happy with the choice of Tulsi. I know people are controversial about it.
Yes, I'm interested in that choice also. I won't say I'm happy, but um, the question that we're raising here uh, is the question of whether she can manage, the intelligence agencies
hmm
as the director of national intelligence. Can she manage them? Can she control them? Can she keep them in line? Uh, those are very serious questions. Okay, and Ray McGovern, who's perhaps the ideal person to attempt this, tries to give us some answers, as we'll see later in the
Okay,
broadcast.
sounds good.
And our fourth topic is the topic of easy wars. The question is, uh, can people find any easy wars these days, rather than wars that threaten our existence? And if they can't find such wars, do they long for them? And is that a problem for foreign policy? So we will be getting into all of those things. We have a number of people join us already, but the only person identifying herself is Evelina Pont. Hello, Evelina.
Yes, hello, Eveline. It's good to see you.
Yes, very good to see you.
I think I heard the Tulsi pick, after hearing people he picked for positions, other positions, it was like she was a fresh air. Like this. She's
I
not an extremist.
yes, I had the same feeling about that. Okay, but there still is the legitimate question, even if you respect her and think that she's a serious candidate. The question of whether she can manage the labyrinthine type of network of the intelligence agencies is still, a legitimate question.
Yes, it is. It is a question. It's always a question to ask about pretty much anybody that's going to go into a certain cabinet position to really question their capabilities, of managing.
Yes, but before we get there, let us go to a video in which Colonel Davis, Daniel L. Davis, otherwise known as Danny Davis, is interviewing Colonel McGregor. Uh, and that was a very interesting interview. I'm going to pick up the interview about 11:18 in. Let me share it here. Okay. And let me turn it on. I'm sorry, it's about 11:05 in.
Okay.
So
You know,
there
I'm
are.
going to I'm going to start sharing too. We have to remember to share.
Okay, thank you very much. In fact, I guess I'll share right now before I go into the video.
Yes.
See, here we go. It's on
Mm,
Facebook that we have to share, of course.
yes. Let me go. Everybody knows Joe's live. Let everybody know.
Sorry, say that again.
I said, let everybody know that you're live.
Yes, that I'm live. Right. And you shared also, haven't you?
Yes, I'm sharing it. Then I'm going to go over to X and
And share it there.
share the one that was live on X.
Okay.
Share that, and I'll do some hashtags on it to try to get it into different areas.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I will start the part of the video that we're going to play. Okay, we're going to play a number of parts. It's excellent. What am I doing here? Oh, I guess I can't play it unless I'm at it. That's the problem.
A lot of very tough tender that could.
Oh, God.
For anyone struggling with high blood sugar, do not drink cold water. Did you know type 2 diabetes is a...
For all intents and purposes, with everybody in the region, why would they wait? So will Mr. Netanyahu, in fact, strike Iran?
Okay, this is more
specifically about the the cabinet that Trump has selected, because there's a lot in MAGA world that are raising some alarms over some of these choices. And of course, nobody's been confirmed yet. This has just been an announcement, but just based on the choices, there's some concern about the direction they're going. And I want to look at some of that. We're going to start off with Secretary of Defense nominee Pete Hegseth from Fox News, who was interviewed just a few days ago, actually a few days before all this came in, with some very illuminating things. And I want to look at some of those comments that he made there. Some are hopeful, some are positive, and some less so. We'll take a look at it. First of all, he was asked, are you worried about nuclear war?
Are you concerned about nuclear war?
I mean, yes, in a general sense, I guess. I found overinflated from the beginning this idea that Vladimir Putin's attack on Ukraine was going to lead to nuclear war or war across the continent. I've always felt like it was, from the beginning, like a couple days in, I'm like, this feels like a Putin's give me my shit back war. It kind of feels like, I feel like you've been pushing pretty hard, and we used to have the former Soviet Union, and we were pretty proud of that. And Ukraine was a part of it, and all these other countries. I want my shit back. And I think I'm at the right time where I'm powerful enough to do it. And you're not quite on my border yet.
So, right off the top, he shows he doesn't understand Putin, okay, and the Russians. Because Putin wasn't really proud of the Soviet Union. Now, he says he regrets its fall, but he was obviously much more tuned in to the Russian Empire than he was to the Soviet Empire, which is a point that's very important, because the Russian Empire was never very expansionist, whereas the Soviet Empire was expansionist. Hang on a second. Okay. Hi, I have to call you back. I'm streaming. Okay. Okay. Thanks. Okay. Sorry about that interruption. I did have to take the call at least. So, there's a big difference if Putin is viewing this from the standpoint of the Soviet Empire as opposed to the Russian Empire. Because the Soviet Empire, okay, was ideological, and their expansionism, okay, was ideological. But the Russian Empire was not really very expansionist over a period of time. Certainly not in the 19th century. Certainly not, okay, in the 20th century until it fell. At the end of the First World War. So the immediate content, the comment, okay, of Hegseth doesn't reflect much of an understanding, okay, of history. That's number one. Also, number two, I don't think anybody has said, okay, that the Russian intervention inside, okay, of Ukraine, or pushing Russia to intervene in Ukraine, would necessarily lead to a nuclear war. All that people have said, okay, me included, is that for the first time in 40 years, the way the Biden administration reacted to the invasion by the Russian, and the way it was pushing the Russians as well, was something that got us into a substantial risk of nuclear war for the first time in 40 years. Okay. Going on.
And Biden's AWOL, so I'm going for it. And just like I did under my minor incursion under Obama, I got what I could. I got Crimea. Now I waited under Trump. Now I'm going to get my. And this idea that I hear all the time, and I've friends who would probably agree with us on most things. They're like, well, if you don't stop him in Ukraine, then he's going to go all the way to Poland. And he's going. I don't think he's. I mean, maybe in a perfect world where he had unlimited capabilities and he could crown himself king of Europe, he would. I think he's probably knows enough to know that it's probably not going much further than Ukraine.
Okay, and I agree with that. But what I have to comment on is, I think what he's trying to say is that Russia is trying to get back what it used to control under the Russian Empire, but that it doesn't have the capability and probably doesn't have the intention to go any further. So he debunks the idea that many people in the West have, and I think he's right, that Putin would push any further than simply getting the possessions of the Russian Empire back in Eastern Europe. That point is, I think, a very important one. Going on.
Now, a couple of things really jumped out at there. Me, the first one was alarming, where he said, "Yeah, I'm kind of worried about nuclear war." How does that make you? How does that strike you that the Secretary of Defense nominee is only sort of worried about nuclear war?
Well, admittedly, the entire discussion was not terribly nuanced or informed, and certainly not by any means sophisticated. So the only thing I can say is that his views are sadly not very different from most congressmen on the Hill and from a lot of senators. None of these people have very sophisticated views of events overseas, and particularly of Russia or Iran or Turkey or China or any of these places. Most of them never been there, and if they were there, they were tourists, flew in, flew out. So I'm not really surprised, Dan. And remember, as we've talked so often, Americans have lost their very reasonable fear of war. You know, as we've talked before, when I was growing up, I remember the Cuban Missile Crisis. I remember what people did, how people felt, and their concerns. And obviously, President Kennedy was extremely concerned and alarmed by the statements of people made that, like Curtis LeMay and the chief of naval operations at the time, because he absolutely was horrified at the prospect of any kind of nuclear exchange, knowing full well the poisonous impact of such a thing. So, you know, he represents, I think, Pete Hegseth, who is a very nice guy and gives a good rousing speech in support of Trump when he was on the campaign trail, is just expressing views in a way that I think is not very different from a lot of Americans.
And let's look at the second part of that there, where he was talking about the Russia-Ukraine war. In that,
So, Dee, do you have any comments at this point?
I was going to say a good point was brought up is that Hegseth doesn't have in-depth knowledge. He just pretty much just repeats what I guess the media says. It doesn't have the knowledge, any deeper knowledge.
we also ought to point out that there was a big difference between President Kennedy and Hegseth. But President Kennedy fought in the Second World War. So he knew what a horrible thing, World War is. He was horrified, of course, by the use of nuclear weapons, and he understood the kind of destruction that could come out of that. Hegseth is a veteran himself, but he's a veteran of the kinds of wars where we were using technology to dominate, and where the opponents we had, in those wars, even though those wars were tough and even though they lasted a long time, there was never a chance of escalation to, a nuclear war. Hegseth, in particular, served in Afghanistan. And that wasn't a war where we were risking, nuclear Holocaust. And so he never really attuned himself to that. And he never really felt what that kind of risk was like. He was too young. So.
Yeah.
At least he doesn't seem to be going any, like the Biden administration, we're going to be there forever. We're going to help them. And, otherwise they're coming for us. And so do you get any optimism from his view there?
Well, I think he reflects the attitude that's developing that we've wasted enough money on this enterprise. He says, well, I don't think he'll go much beyond Ukraine. And that's fine. And he's not going to go much beyond the Dnieper River unless, we compel it. So that's fine. But this, again, is blowing with the wind in Washington. The wind has changed in Washington. The money is drying up. No one wants to stand up and say what a catastrophic error this was and admit the folly. So everybody sort of says, well, that's enough. We've done all we can. And they walk away. We did that after Vietnam. Very little accountability is involved. It doesn't give me much hope for any sort of rational approach in the future, Dan. I mean, come on, let's face it. It's easy to say now, well, I guess that's not going to work. But thanks very much. I mean, look at the legions of people who are saying, well, I guess Ukraine can't win. And just 6 weeks ago, they were hard over. And he wasn't any different. Let's give more strike weapons to the Ukrainians so they can do more damage to the Russians. That was something from Waltz when he was in Congress just a few weeks ago. Now he's changed his tune. It doesn't.
Okay, so note, that Waltz is the, Michael Waltz, as opposed to Tim Waltz. Michael Waltz is a Republican congressman who Trump has picked as his national security advisor. And Doug was quite right about the positions that Michael Waltz was taking only a few months back. Any further comments on this, Dee?
No, let's continue.
Okay.
Give me any confidence that we have anybody thinking entering these offices at the moment.
And it's also important to understand the environment that he's going to come into. So we had General Bauer, the NATO general, I think in charge of ground forces. I can't remember his exact title, but he is, I think, trying to set the stage that they're not going to, quote, give in on the change of American leadership here. Or a couple of things he exposed here, which I don't think he intended to. First of all, his comment there, he said, actually, Afghanistan was never of strategic importance. If we're really honest, we spent 20 years there and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, wait a minute. You're just acknowledging that the whole thing was pointless in there and that it contained nothing of any strategic value for the United States. Then, of course, the question is, then why the hell?
I thought that was a very important point of Danny Davis. In other words, why did we spend 20 years there if it wasn't of strategic importance? One possible answer to that is we thought there was an immense amount of mineral wealth, okay, in Afghanistan. And our corporations wanted to exploit that wealth. That was probably one of the reasons why we decided to stay there for 20 years and fight.
Hell, do we stay for 20 years when you knew it wasn't? That's one. The second part, though, is more important, because he says, no, we have to keep going for Ukraine because it is, quote, connected to the rules-based international order, and that's important to us. And this just shows that, you can say, like you just did, that at least Hegseth and many people are saying, well, all right, this didn't work, let's start closing it down. But that doesn't seem to be the case in NATO. They're still with this fiction that it matters if you want this rules-based order. Like you can just choose to, no, we'll keep going here until we win. But that's just divorced from reality as it can get. What do you make of that?
Well, the rules-based order is ultimately whatever we say it is, because we make the rules. We're talking about the United States of America. The notion that we have any respect for international law is absurd. We've ignored international law, customs, and rules whenever it suits us to do so. So that's a lot of nonsense. Second thing, if China has any ambitions in Ukraine, it's to build rail lines into Ukraine so that China can import the wheat and other food products, commodities that Ukraine produces back to China. And China can sell its goods to the Ukrainians. That's about it. See, the thing is that he, like so many people in the United States, are living in a world that no longer exists. Strangely enough, President Putin and President Xi are interested in a world where there is no war, because war is ultimately bad for business, which they understand. They want to get this over with. They want to stop it. They want to get back to building prosperity and improving the living standards in their countries. They have huge numbers of people that want to live better, who aspire to live better. They want to meet those needs and expectations. We, on the other hand, think that these are all bloodthirsty criminals leading vast armies ready to sweep down on all of us. That's a lot of nonsense. They don't. They're not interested in it. We're the ones who still view the use of bullying tactics with our military, sanctions and tariffs as the way forward. And we can't rely on that anymore. We don't live in a world where that favors us in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah, you see, it's not 1991 anymore, which we never left that mentality. You mentioned China.
Okay, 1991 was the war, in which Doug McGregor was a hero for his command of tanks. Okay, so he was decorated for that war and became a colonel due to his service, in that war. But he's a very sagacious person, and he researches and writes books and has a sense of history. So he knows 1924 is not the same as 91. And that things have changed. He's been watching the changes and analyzing the changes, and commenting on the changes. And also Danny Davis, who's a friend of Doug's, is also quite well aware of all the changes, and you're seeing that reflected in the conversation here. Any further comments, Steve?
No, that's fine.
Okay.
And what some of the things they want. In that same interview there, Hegseth was talking about how he views China and how some of the Pentagon's own war computer simulations have not turned out well. Now, he's going to say something here on the one hand that seems pretty self-evident. I think you and I have talked about this before, but then it's where he goes after that that raises a little eyebrows.
In the past X number of years, 10, 12, 15, the Pentagon has a perfect record in all of its war games against China. We lose every time inside the Pentagon war games. We know what our real capability. You see, we didn't even get to this part of the war on warriors. I mean, the military-industrial complex, the way we procure weapon systems. We're always the way our system works, the way our bureaucratic system works, where the speed of weapons procurement works, we're always a decade behind in fighting the last war. Whereas China, we have, what did Rumsfeld say? You go to the war to the army you have. We have the army. China's building an army specifically dedicated to defeating the United States of America. That is their strategic outset. Take hypersonic missiles. So if our whole power projection platform is aircraft carriers and the ability to project power that way strategically around the globe, and yeah, we have a nuclear triad and all of that, but a big part of it. And if 15 hypersonic missiles can take out our 10 aircraft carriers in the first 20 minutes of a conflict, what does that look like?
Do you have an old PC lying around? Then this video is for you. Fact, there are a ton of old computers.
Now, you have been talking about the vulnerability of the aircraft carrier and how it's like the battleship of the age old that we haven't recognized yet. So you probably would agree with that part there. And certainly, yeah, I've talked about the imbalance in that part of the world. If we went over to fight China on their terms, in their front door over the issue of Taiwan, they have all the operational advantages. But if he's right on that, then that would portend a significant change of policy, especially if he's going to lead the Pentagon to where we have to have very different policies regarding China, and they can't continue to be hostile and pushing. How do you view that?
In January 1997, when Breaking the Phalanx was published, I had a whole chapter on a war in CENTCOM, and I compared the Navy's position to that of our ships off the coast of Okinawa during World War II. In fact, my father was serving on one of those vessels and sat under the hail of kamikazes that flew in. The kamikazes sunk something like 9 ships, damaged another 26 or 27. It was a very frightening experience. And my point was, what you saw with the kamikazes, make it, you sort of cube it and then make it much more lethal. And large numbers of shore batteries consisting of cruise missiles and unmanned, what a cruise missile is essentially an unmanned attack system. They'll sink most of these amphibious ships and other kinds of vessels and changing warfare. Well, that was in 97. Of course, I was pilloried and the Navy renounced me because I was arguing for no more aircraft carriers. Don't build anymore. Let's use these until retirement because they're only useful as in a permissive environment. That's true. But he's saying that now. And of course, more and more people have come on board with this idea. I think Andy Krepanevich had the idea of an arsenal ship, which wasn't all that bad. It looked something like the Monitor from the Civil War and just carried lots and lots of missiles that it could launch. But the truth of the matter is submarines rule the waves, and our preeminent priority strategically should be the building of additional submarines and the maintenance of that fleet. Certainly the maintenance of the human capital. That goes into another discussion.
Yeah.
That's important. I don't think he knows anything. I think he's mouthing things. That goes on in Washington a lot. Most people in Washington have a cocktail level of familiarity with anything. And you go to the cocktail party and you pick up on what's the theme. And so targeting aircraft carriers, that's an easy theme right now. People point to that sort of thing. The thing he doesn't understand is that guess who's building aircraft carriers? The Chinese.
Yeah.
Now, why are they building aircraft carriers? Are they building it because they want to attack us? No, because that's seen as a metric of your greatness as a great power, just as battleships in the 1930s were viewed in the same way. Adolf Hitler wasted precious time and resources on battleships, the Bismarck, the Gneisenau, and they were great ships, but they were no longer necessary.
Yeah.
Had he plowed all of that into submarines, he could have begun the war with more submarines. He had something like 29 operational submarines when the war broke out. And people have run those war games and said that if Adolf Hitler had had 50 plus submarines at the beginning of the war, he'd have won. He'd have sunk everything.
Wow.
So that's pretty shocking, isn't it? I thought that was very shocking.
Yes, it is. It's quite interesting.
Yes, very historical. But also, there's a very important point there, too. When Hegseth was talking about what the Chinese were doing, is that they were building their military forces to defeat us, he neglected to say something very, very important. Yes, they've been building their forces to defeat us, but specifically to defeat us in a fight over Taiwan, because we have been extremely aggressive in trying to keep Taiwan away from China, even though diplomatically we and the rest of the world all know that Taiwan is a part of China and recognize that Taiwan is a part of China. It's a breakaway province, okay, of China. And eventually it's going to have to go back to China. So what China is preparing for is to get a part of its own territory back. That's the war with us. Okay, but the big question is, why have we been preparing or making noises about or trying to basically sustain a conflict over the issue of when and whether but Taiwan is going to go back to China? Why are we contending over that? Why are we conflicting with China over that? Why are we creating problems over that? Hegseth doesn't really bring that up. Okay, but if Hegseth's analysis is right, that China is preparing to, take over Taiwan, and that's all they want, then why is it a vital interest of ours to stop them? And doesn't this suggest that the foreign policy of the Trump administration should be simply to withdraw our resistance to the reunification of China and Taiwan?
Mm-hmm.
So
Respect the one China policy.
respect the one China policy that we agreed to, in the middle 1970s when we had the breaking of the freeze with China, when the Nixon administration basically negotiated a peace with China. One of the bases of that peace was our recognition that Taiwan was a part of China. But there was always a part of our political system that didn't agree with Nixon on this and wanted to keep alive the idea that Taiwan would be a forward base of ours. And in all the years since, that's a group inside of our country that's had more and more influence over time. And in the 21st century, they have a lot of influence. And the question is the intention to keep Taiwan independent of China, even though technically they're a part of China, is that an intention that outruns our capabilities compared to China's capabilities? It seems to me what Hegseth was saying and what Doug was agreeing with, okay, is the idea that in terms of the war games, we have a perfect record in war games over Taiwan. We lose every time.
Yeah, I saw that.
Which suggests we don't have the capability to contest with China. And as the years pass,
Mm-hmm.
well, we can always produce the money. That's not a problem. Okay, but we don't have the military capability, nor do we intend to build the military capability to contest with China over Taiwan. What they've been doing over the years is to build up their military so that they do have the capability to thwart our naval power, okay, in the China Sea. And right now, with their missile power, the new jets they're building, the kind of naval force they're building that is about the defense of China, they now greatly outmatch us in capability to fight a war over Taiwan. And there's nothing we can do about it with the kind of foreign policy that we're willing to prosecute at this time. So our intentions here have been outrunning our capabilities. And we have to face that. We're not, again, in the Far East, okay, as in Ukraine, as in Israel, okay, in West Asia. We're allowing the intentions we have to outrun the capabilities we have to reach those intentions. This is a very important point about our foreign policy. It's way out of balance.
Definitely.
And we have to change our intentions and bring them in line with our capabilities, or we have to make the necessary effort to build up our capabilities, while noting, of course, that perhaps however we build our capabilities, we can never equal China with respect to that area of the world, simply because China borders that area and we do not. And China has 4 to 5 times the number of people that we have, and right now a larger manufacturing capacity than we have. And the question is, could we ever change that going forward, especially since China is growing much faster than we're growing economically, and transforming their society much faster than we're transforming ours? Could we possibly catch up, even if we went on a World War II type of emergency basis? Could we possibly catch up with them? It's a highly debatable sort of proposition. And of course, there's no appetite to introduce that kind of society here in the United States again. So there we are.
War game that he should be interested in paying attention to. That's the lesson of the Second World War. And Nimitz said as much at the end of the war. He said, none of us appreciated the lethality and importance of the submarine. And Nimitz had commanded a submarine. So that's nice, Pete. Great. That's not part of a larger strategy. There is no new strategy. If there's no new strategy, you can't get a new structure. If you don't have a new structure, you're not going to get new people. You're just putting 1 or 2 people here or there that you think are going to lead somewhere new. It doesn't work that way.
Yeah, and that's actually something I wanted to go down the list of, because what's at least supposed to be what's written out is the job description of the Secretary of Defense is supposed to be to set a national security strategy, and then to make sure that the force actually supports that strategy, and you can actually get it done within the resource constraints that you have, et cetera. And he mentioned in that clip there something that Rumsfeld had said in 2005. He said, well, you get the army that you have when you go to war. Now, you have been publishing all these books since 1997 forward that literally lay out a blueprint for how to go there and how to get a force that can actually meet the next war, not trying to look at what happened in the previous war. What can he do to try and build a force for the future while avoiding war in China?
What's the fastest way to get relief for toenail fungus? Is it A, apple cider vinegar? Is it B, tea tree oil? Or is it C, using topical ointments found at drugstores? You might be surprised to learn that the fastest way to get relief for toenail fungus...
Sorry.
Well, I'm glad that somebody's finally wakened up and started talking about the folly of war with China, because my point on China from the very beginning has been that there's an old saying in the Navy, a ship's a fool to fight a fort. In other words, if you think your ships offshore are going to demolish a well-fortified site that's ashore with all the equipment and capabilities and weapon systems to fight back, you're wrong. You're going to lose. China is the largest fortress in the history of mankind. and all of their investments in shore batteries and missiles makes it very, very dangerous for us to approach China. And that's the whole point. We talk about this denial strategy that the Chinese have invented, or they haven't really invented it, but adopted. And we keep talking about how we're going to break through this denial strategy and win the war. Well, that's a lot of nonsense. You can't do it. They've got more missiles than we have ships. They have more capabilities to hurl at us than we have ships. But the truth is that with 7 or 8 nuclear-powered attack submarines, you could shut down all the commerce that goes in and out of China from the sea. Think about that. So the notion of building more surface ships at this stage for that kind of purpose makes no sense. But that threat is understood by the Chinese. They're working very hard to try and make some breakthroughs in anti-submarine technology. Now, having said all of that, let's get back to strategy. There's no point in attacking China. It doesn't make any sense. Asia is not interested in war. Nobody in Asia wants to go to war. This is the great myth that is perpetrated in Washington to justify out-of-control defense spending. This is where you get people like Elbridge Colby, who for years has been talking about the war with China. He thought he could become Secretary of the Navy and then ultimately preside over some wasteful buildup of the surface fleet to reenact whatever happened in the 1960s or 70s, to realize Admiral Zumwalt's dream of a carrier-based fleet attacking the Russians on the Kamchatka Peninsula. Well, that was fine for Admiral Zumwalt, and he was a brilliant man, but that makes no sense now. So you need a different strategy, and we have to get past assuming certain states are enemies and others are friends. We live in an environment where everyone is a limited liability partner. That means that we share interests with most people most of the time. We want access to the global commons, space, the atmosphere, the oceans, and so forth. That's what's important. And we ought to be interested in that. And we should be interested in avoiding unnecessary conflict because it's destructive. We've lost, 14 trillion since 2001 on these crazy wars in the Middle East. And you and I sat in the desert in 1991 when victory was declared, long before anything of real importance had happened. And what was really important? It was the decapitation or removal of the people in Baghdad. Okay, you put in another bunch. You offer control to a new group of generals, invite the UN to come in and hold elections, and you get the hell out. That was something that should have happened in 2003, but we were fighting for different reasons. We were trying to make the entire Middle East, along with much of the world, safe for Israel. It hasn't worked very well. It's made matters much worse for Israel. And that's been obvious to me and to many Israelis since 2003. That's mixing apples and oranges. Well, Afghanistan was irrelevant, but Ukraine is really important. Why? We have no long-term strategic interest in Eastern Ukraine. Nobody in Europe does. Everybody in Europe wants to do business with Ukraine and Russia and White Russia. Why? Because of the things they have. That's what the great marriage of Germany to Russia was always all about, a mutually beneficial arrangement, much like the one that exists today between Russia and China. We need to get out of this. We don't fit into it, and it's not in our interest, but we need a new strategy along the lines that I've discussed.
Yeah, indeed we do. And in fact, because you mentioned that about the Middle East also, and how we've been trying to reorganize that or reorder it, and it's just been backfired. Here is what Hegseth said regarding the Middle East. And interestingly enough, because he starts off by saying that he's a reformed neocon.
Do this for flat belly at 60s.
Oh my God.
This is day 17 of doing nothing but this chair workout challenge every morning. I am following the workout plan on the Yoga Go app.
I've been a recovering neocon for 6 years now. Like the foolishness with which we ricocheted around the world, intervening, think it was in our best interest, when really we just overturned the table and created something worse in almost every single scenario, has led to the hubris of the Pentagon is that they want to now tell other countries how to do counterinsurgency based on what we did in Iraq and Afghanistan. Are you kidding me? So you really have learned nothing. Okay, nothing. So yeah, you're right. The trust there that our political leaders or our generals would have our best interests in mind is totally broken. It's totally broken. I acknowledge that completely. And the last thing I want is my son deploying to the Donbass to defend Eastern Ukraine.
Now, before I get your comment on that, he says he's a recovering neocon from 6 years ago, but here's something that he said regarding the Middle East from 4 years ago.
Sometimes you have moments, Steve, and I happen to believe that we can't kick the can down the road any longer in trying to prevent Iran from getting a nuclear bomb. They used the killing of Soleimani as an excuse to say, we're scrapping the Iran deal. We all know they were scrapping it anyway. So what better time than now to say, we're starting the clock. You've got a week. You've got X amount of time before we start taking out your energy production facilities. We take out key infrastructure. We take out your missile sites. We take out nuclear development. We take out
popular
capabilities. Or, you know what, take out a Quds headquarters while you're at it if you want. I understand that's not a popular idea.
But I understand, I've been hearing that we believe that the Iranians are hiding missiles and weapons in some of these cultural sites, churches,
of course they do.
Mosques.
This is what Islamists do. Is what they've done on the battlefield against folks like me and my entire generation. Human shields, using mosques, using hospitals, schools. This is what our enemies do. Now, that doesn't mean we go on and target cultural sites, but what it means is we are clear-eyed about how our enemies use the rules that we write against us. And if we want to defeat them, this is something, having seen it, if we want to defeat them, we have to think smart about how these rules, how we navigate within these rules without playing in a game that's rigged to help them so that we can't win. If we're going to fight to prevent Iran from getting a nuclear bomb, this regime, then we need to rewrite the rules that are advantageous to us. I don't want to hit cultural sites on purpose, but if you're using one to harbor your most dangerous weapons, then that should be on the target list.
And the president did.
Well, that's we can hope that 4 years ago that was his view, and maybe it's not now, but especially given Trump's proclivity to generally avoid war, how do you see him coming into this one now?
Well, you just listen to the Israeli mantra. That is exactly the argument that they make. And then they go on to insist that their war is our war, that our interests and theirs are identical. It's a dangerous path because most of his comments are taken, if you take them out of context, they don't make much sense. And the context is something that everybody ignores that wants to go to war with Iran. And that's what this is all about. And if you want to benefit from what I would call Israeli largesse, which is really Jewish capital in the diaspora, then you have to sign on for the war with Iran. And that's what he's done. That's what he's about. It's unfortunate because it's very simplistic. You know, I remember people that were cheering that we had killed Soleimani in Iraq. And I pointed out that there were a couple of problems with this. First of all, Soleimani technically was a member of a foreign government. He was the equivalent of the national security advisor to the supreme leader. So he's essentially the same as if someone killed Waltz and then cheered in the streets. Look what we've done. Dumb idea. It was wrong. It was against international law. It was actually against our own laws. Secondly, well, he's responsible for all these American deaths in Iraq. No, he's not. What he did is what we would do if we had an enemy in Mexico. What would we do if there were Russian or Chinese forces in Mexico backing one side against another side in Mexico, and the other side being perhaps a more moderate or liberally minded group versus a group that wanted to not only capture control of Mexico, but then wage war on us? I think we'd have been much tougher on our enemy in Mexico than the Iranians ever were on us in Iraq. You know, you can't isolate these things. He's talking about warfare that is precise and clean and sterile. That doesn't exist. You can't bomb things with impunity. We can't bomb our way out of anything, neither can Netanyahu. This is a dead end. And if we keep it up, we're going to end up at war with a pretty substantial portion, not just of the Middle East, but probably of Asia and Russia. And this is unnecessary. It's counterproductive. It's antithetical to our interests. We're not ready for it. We're not prepared for it.
Now, I can.
Okay, I'm going to stop it there. Okay, and there are a number of points I'd like to make. Okay, but Dee, do you have any points you'd like to make?
I'll listen to what you have to say.
Okay. Okay. The first thing I have to say is who should have been the nominee for Secretary of Defense for the Trump administration? Should Hegseth had been the nominee, or should it have been Colonel McGregor?
It should have been Colonel McGregor.
I mean, it's pretty obvious here that it should have been Colonel McGregor. Okay, because he's on top of all of this with respect to a broad point of view that reflects what we should have been doing in Iran, in West Asia, and what we also should be doing in China. And at his fingertips are the relevant historical points, the points of military capability, uh, uh, the doctrines of war, and what the dominating weapons are right now. He knows all this stuff, but there's no indication that Hegseth has any understanding of this kind of detail.
He doesn't. He doesn't have the knowledge. With age comes experience, and that's why it's important. For example, like Colonel McGregor, he has the years and years of knowledge, of the different regions of the world. Hegseth doesn't have that.
Yes, he doesn't have that, but we have to note that there are a lot of people who have the same number of years of experience as Doug, who don't have the knowledge.
That's
but
true.
Doug has obviously been operating as a student of the realities of war, studying the history of war, and also has been very close to what has been going on for the last 30 years in terms of foreign policy and war. So that has been Doug's life.
Right. He looks at it through a wider spectrum, too.
Yes.
He doesn't just look at it through the U.S. perspective. He looks at it through whatever country, through their lens, too.
Just to put this shortly, he's a real pro in this area. He isn't fooling around. Okay, he has a point of view which has been thoroughly thought out over a period of years. At this point, I want to introduce something else. He recently completed a paper, a 57-page paper, which has been published at the Ron Paul Institute. I'm going to put the link to the paper in the comment section here. Okay, but that's a paper that everyone should look at, because it's not only about a fiscal storm, which there are some parts of the fiscal storm that I don't believe that Doug actually understands. Okay, because he has the old view, of economics, that the United States is just a household, that's writ large, and he talks from that particular point of view. So he misunderstands what we are capable of from a fiscal point of view, and underestimates it. But from the standpoint of real military capability, he is right on. And I'm going to post a link to his paper, so you can look into it. I'll probably be discussing that paper at length, on Tuesday, once I've had a chance to fully go through it.
And I was going to say something about Hegseth. It's Hegseth and some other appointees. Their lens is through this Christian Zionism.
With respect to the Middle East, yes, their lens is Christian Zionism. And that is devastating, because it's another area in which the intentions that we're adopting, which are coming out of the evangelical movement here in this country, are not in accord with our relative capabilities in that area, because our intentions are leading us into a war with Iran, which we can't possibly win.
And it's sheer stupidity.
It is folly.
Mm-hmm.
It is folly. And Trump has made the wrong appointments. And the reasons for that are even worse. Specifically, Trump has supposedly got $100 million from the Adelson fortune to run his campaign. And it is said that he is paying back by appointing Hegeseth and Walsh and Marco Rubio as Secretary of State. So he's distorting our whole foreign policy, and he's biasing it towards fighting for Israel and fighting with Iran, even bringing us close to a war with Iran. Because of what? Campaign financing that he got? I mean, who's running the country? Is he running the country? Okay. Or is Adelson running the country?
Good question.
Yeah, it's a very, very key question. And so you see the damage that allowing the oligarchs to contribute to campaigns actually does. In this case, it may bring us to the brink of nuclear war, because Russia has a military alliance with Iran now, or will have in just a few days. It's coming if it's not already there.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and that military alliance commits Russia to do whatever it has to do to defend Iran.
Mm-hmm.
And that brings us face to face again with intercontinental hypersonic ballistic missiles that will have nuclear warheads. And we can't get into those kinds of situations. The whole secret to having a peaceful world with great powers in it that have these nuclear armaments is that one great power doesn't present an existential threat, to another great power. We have to avoid situations in which we get into existential threats. And the world has changed in West Asia, not only because of the great increases in the capability of Iran, but also because of the increases in the capability of the three powers that are allied together now, specifically Iran, Russia, and China.
Mm-hmm.
That's something new over the last 2-3 years. That has happened, and our foreign policy has to adjust to that. And from a realistic standpoint, that means that our foreign policy has to say, don't have a war with Iran, because that brings us into an existential crisis, which we need not have.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Our foreign policy and the Biden administration, had not adjusted to that. And now Trump appears to be doubling down on what it takes to get into a war with Iran and eventually with Russia and China. It makes no sense. It's not worth it. The people of the United States don't want it. The people of Russia don't want it. The people of China don't want it. The people of Iran don't want it. The only group of people that wants it is the right-wing fanatics inside of Israel and the evangelicals here who are looking to bring the situation of Armageddon on us all.
I know they're crazy. And since it's been announced that Trump being the president-elect, there's been increased attacks in Syria and Lebanon. It's been going great. They're going crazy. Israel's just all pumped up.
Right. It's all pumped up. Okay, let me say a word here. We have 58 people watching here. They've been steadily watching, actually, pretty much since the start, which is fine. But we have only one like, according to my indicator. Please do like the stream because that helps, with the algorithm. Okay. Please also share the stream so more people can come. And please do subscribe to the program if you haven't already subscribed to it.
Yes, and you go into the comments before you go on to the next.
Okay, let's go on to, oh yes, let me do that. We have a number of good comments. People say hello. Thank you for saying hello. Sherry Wise is here. Hello, Sherry, and Lana's here. Thank you, Lana. Evelyn, of course, is also here. Evelyn says, I appoint Colonel McGregor for Secretary of Defense. Yeah, he would have been a great appointment for Secretary of Defense. Oh, and Jeffrey Sachs for Secretary of State. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. We need Jeffrey Sachs for Secretary of State. Lana says hi, Sherry. Also, Lana says scary conversation. Sherry says Colonel McGregor makes good points. Evelina says, glad you agree with me, Dr. Joe. Sherry says, yes, it is a scary time. And there's the paper of the Ron Paul Institute that I linked for you. Hexeth sounds like a witch name, laugh out loud. And then she mentions the town of Salem in Massachusetts, of course. I have no idea whether Hexeth comes from that part of the country or not, but it's an interesting point. Lana says, I see 5 watching and 3 likes. That's from YouTube, but of course, we're streaming to Facebook as well, and we're streaming to Twitter also. So according to my indicator, there are 58 people who are watching. And I'm sure later that when I look at the statistics for all 3 sites, there'll be more like 150 people, who are actually watching. Anyway, I need more likes, folks, so please do like to help me with the algorithm. Now, there's another much shorter video, which was actually the first part, of this first video, but I wanted to separately call out, as a topic, and a clip was made from the Danny Davis Colonel McGregor video. And I'll now share that clip. It's specifically on Turkey and the breaking of relations between Turkey, and Israel. So let's go to that now, because there are many illuminating things the 2 colonels have to say about the breaking of relations between Israel and Turkey. And these also relate to the question of whether we have the capability to defend Israel or not. And if a war breaks out, in the Middle East, and Turkey and Iran both join against us with Russia and China in the background, there's no way that Israel and the United States can be successful.
No.
Anyway, let's go on to that. So,
where they're meeting together to talk about the transition of.
So I bought a $500 bottle of Creed Aventus because it's the world's most popular fragrance.
Anything, neither can Netanyahu. This is a dead end.
Sorry, let me go back to the beginning. I thought I had the right video up, but I didn't.
Back to the show. We always grateful to have you here.
Oh, thanks.
And look, even before we get that though, because there's some news that's breaking this morning that's haven't penetrated much of the Western media so far, because really all the stuff about Trump and everything else. But Turkey has broken diplomatic relations with Israel now, especially coming on the heels of Biden's loss and heading into the Trump administration. This seems kind of ill-timed. I'm sure Trump didn't want to have to deal with this, but can you please explain to people why this happened? Because it's going to come out of left field for most people, and why you're concerned about it.
No, this is a very important development. There'll be no question about it. Keep in mind that certainly since this tragic war in Gaza broke out and the expulsion and killing of hundreds, tens of thousands, over 100,000 now, I think the Lancet Journal said over 189,000 Arabs, Muslim and some Christian, driven out of their homes permanently, driven into camps, so forth. Turkey has exercised tremendous restraint, largely because Mr. Erdogan, like everybody else in the region, doesn't want to be involved in a war. He wants to build up his country, build its prosperity. But things have gone.
Okay, so this point is really so important. Turkey doesn't want to be involved in a war. Iran really doesn't want to be involved in a war. China doesn't want to be involved in a war. Nations of Central Asia don't want to be involved in a war. Who wants to be involved in a war? It looks like it's Israel and the United States and Western Europe that are pushing to use war as an instrument of foreign policy instead of using diplomacy as an instrument of foreign policy. What is that about? I don't think the peoples of our nations want war, except maybe, of course, for the people of Israel.
The Greater Israel Plan.
The Greater Israel Plan. But all the rest of us don't want war.
No.
Okay, so how is it we're on the brink of war?
From bad to worse. Lebanon has changed the equation for Mr. Erdogan, because 1.5 to 2 million people, refugees from Lebanon, are now moving towards Turkey. And they've already got 4 or 5 million refugees living inside their country. They can't afford any more. So he's being pushed and pushed and pushed. In addition to which, keep in mind that Turkey historically, because of its Ottoman past, has been considered the leading state of Sunni Islam. And many of the Arabs, most of the Arabs, of course, are Sunni Muslims, have been disappointed in the absence of Turkey as a voice for reason, and also a willingness to combat what's happening in Israel. And I think what's happened now is the assumption that we and the Israelis made was that everyone would sit quietly, do nothing, while tens of thousands of Muslim Arabs, first in Gaza, secondly in southern Lebanon, and increasingly in the so-called West Bank, would be killed and made homeless, and nobody would do anything about it. The other point is that Mr. Erdogan has been supplying Israel first with a lot of goods and food. That has largely stopped. But now the question is, what will he do about the oil? Because the Israelis have been extraordinarily dependent upon the oil shipped to them from Azerbaijan through Turkey down into Syria and Israel. If they don't have access to that oil, and that represents about 80% of the oil that is utilized by the Israelis, they're in a very serious problem. And so we'll wait and see what he does about that. But the point is that he's now jumped on board with virtually everyone else in the region. Everyone in the region is now aligned with Iran against Israel, something that everybody thought was impossible. There you go. That's it. And that line is extraordinarily important to the Israelis. And of course, everybody has allowed black market operations to go on: Jordan, Egypt, Turkey, moving things in and out of Israel. But the oil is by far the single most important commodity If that's
And-
cut off, then Israel's in a lot of trouble.
And I want to go a little bit further, because you're talking about a region wide here. Turkey alone is a big issue for all the reasons you just mentioned. But it's not just Turkey. You also have what was enmity between Saudi Arabia and Iran. Actually, China helped bring them together not long ago. But now then, even in the last few days, they're also getting closer and closer together diplomatically. How do you see that?
Smithy is changing the way you think about cast iron, crafting American-made cookware with smooth, easy to.
This is extraordinarily important because not only was there historically animosity or hostility between the two, but I think the two have concluded that their interests obviously coincide, particularly when it comes to the movement of oil and goods and natural gas and so forth, and also with Russia and China. 90% of all the oil that's produced by Iran goes to China. So the notion that if you cut the oil off, that somehow or another you're going to harm Iran is crazy. In other words, that we cut it off as far as their ability to export to us in the West. Their principal export is to China. If you cut that oil off, then obviously the Chinese are very unhappy, and the Chinese already have a small flotilla of ships outside the Persian Gulf, and I suspect they'll send submarines out there, and they will eventually cooperate or coordinate with the Russian vessels that are in the area, as well as Iran and Saudi Arabia. Now, here's the worst case scenario, though, and that is that Saudi Arabia and the Emirates decide to pull their wealth from our banks and repatriate it entirely to the peninsula. That's being discussed, and that would have a very, let us say, deleterious impact on the United States. And in addition to pulling their wealth out and repatriating it to the peninsula, I would expect them to dump their remaining treasuries. They've always controlled, almost 40% of our treasuries. These things are the treasury bonds that were issued at very, very low interest rates that now increasingly have no value.
So here's where Doug, is going off base. He thinks it's a threat to the fiscal solvency, of the United States if other countries start to dump our treasuries, on the open market. Because, of course, if treasuries are dumped, on the open market, and the price of treasuries goes down, then the implication is that if we issue any new treasuries, there won't be any buyers around for those particular treasuries. There's actually too much to be said about that to make clear why this is not actually a problem for the United States. But I'll try to put this, very briefly. First of all, we have arranged the sale of treasuries, but through the federal government to major banks and other private sector brokers. And we set the situation up in such a way that the issuances of treasuries always have to sell out.
Mm-hmm.
It's a manipulated market. It's not a real market. So when we issue a round of treasuries to go along with our deficit spending, the fact that those treasuries will sell out is predetermined by the arrangements that we made. And the people who are trying to dump treasuries in the international market cannot disturb this particular aspect of it. Now, I can't go into more detail than that, because I don't have time here. But also the other part of this is we always have the option of simply not issuing treasuries to cover our deficit spending. The idea that we have to issue the treasuries comes from the idea that many economists and observers have developed over time the idea that there's no United States money. There's only private money that people own, And if we need to have more money to finance our deficit spending, we have to go to the private sector and we have to borrow the money, or we have to tax away the money, okay, in order to fund our spending. But this is false. Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution says that the United States Congress, and implies agencies delegated by the United States Congress, have the power to create money, to coin money, but this has been interpreted far more broadly as simply creating money, printing money in the form of cash, and creating money in the form of additions to bank balances. So the federal government has that power. And in fact, the way new money is created inside of our economy is always through the Federal Reserve, adding money to reserve accounts, okay, in banks. That is, okay, what actually happens. The sale of bonds has absolutely nothing to do with it. It's something else that we do. It's a hangover from gold standard times. Okay, but we went off the gold standard, during the 1970s, and we now don't have to sell bonds anymore. We can do different things. The Congress could order the Federal Reserve to simply create new reserves in order to cover the appropriations of deficit spending. Okay, that's one way to approach the problem. I refer to this as overt congressional financing. Okay, and an alternative way of doing this is for the federal government to use a 1996 coin law to have the Treasury Secretary get the U.S. Mint to mint a platinum coin with face value in trillions, okay, of dollars, take that over to the Federal Reserve, deposit it in the Federal Reserve, get, okay, the Federal Reserve to credit, okay, the coin. In other words, get them to place entirely new reserves into the mint's account in accord with the face value, okay, of the coin. The Secretary of the Treasury could mint a $100 trillion coin if he or she wants to do that. And the Federal Reserve would be forced to accept a deposit of that coin and to credit the account of the mint with $100 trillion. In turn, the Treasury Secretary can sweep the mint's account into the Treasury spending account for the profits that are involved in minting the coin, transmitting it up to the Federal Reserve, depositing it, okay, in the Federal Reserve. In very rough terms now, the costs, okay, of minting the coin, the cost of the platinum, the cost of engraving, the costs, okay, of sending it up to the New York Fed, okay, for deposit, might be at this point $6,000 or $7,000, but the face value of the coin is $100 trillion. So the profit that could be swept into the Treasury spending account is roughly the $100 trillion face value of the coin minus the $6,000 or $7,000 it costs to create the coin and to get it up there. And lo, in just a few days, one could see a balance in the Treasury spending account of $100 trillion. That balance could be used for two purposes: to spend the appropriations of Congress and to repay Treasury bonds and interest as those fall due over a period of 30 years. So the whole national debt could be paid off over 30 years, okay, in regular fashion. National debt is now something like $35 or $36 trillion. It could all be paid off. And there would be another, $64 trillion still left to cover deficit spending for some time, okay, to come. So in other words, we don't have to issue any more treasuries. We don't care if other countries wish to dump our treasuries. It really doesn't matter from the standpoint of fiscal solvency or fiscal capability. Anyway, going on with the video.
At least on the open markets, if they dump those and sell them off at bargain prices, our markets are in a lot of trouble. So it's
not our markets, okay, that are in a lot of trouble. The bond markets, okay, are in trouble.
Mm-hmm.
But our markets here in this country are not necessarily in trouble at all if we do the right things.
not just a question of kinetic warfare. There are many other things that are happening on the sidelines that could have a hugely negative impact on us.
Well, and plus we've had, I believe, Saudi Arabia and Turkey have both petitioned to sign BRICS, so to join into that as well, on top of Iran. So you see, you talked about Russia and China, and you see that whole thing expanding right before our eyes. To what extent do you think these announcements and these activities are happening after Trump was elected, but before he takes power? Is this some kind of a signal to the administration that they want to see some sort of change in policy?
Yeah, I think so. But the problem is that they were waiting for President Trump to announce his candidates for office. In other words, his nominees for appointed positions. And having watched the names come out, and they know the backgrounds, none of these people are stupid. They actually pay attention to our media. They pay attention to the figures in the media that are reporting on what's happening here. They look at the figures that are nominees, and they have concluded, not unreasonably, that all of these nominees are Israeli approved, that effectively these people are 100% with Israel's war in the region. It's not just a question of do they like Israel or do they favor Israel, or would they support Israel if Israel needed support in the process of simply defending itself. That's not what this is about. They see that these people have effectively sworn allegiance to the Zionist cause. That's the way it is viewed in the Middle East. I think it's viewed that way around the world. So if that's the case, and these are the people that are going to be in positions of enormous influence and power, and they assume that given the fact that the Senate and the House are both largely in the grip of AIPAC, the American Israeli Political Action Committee, or Political Affairs Committee, that then they see this as a 100% backing for Israel in its war, and they have to assume that we will join it. So all of these things are now coming out at a point in time where everyone in the region has said the game is up. There's no hope for something better. There will be no discussions. There will be no negotiating. We're stuck with a very dangerous situation. The question is, what are they going to do about it? And I think what they're doing right now is carefully coalescing into an effective alliance. And I think you'll see some very interesting things over the next few weeks. Now, none of us knows what comes next. Iran is held back because Iran was kind of hopeful that, Mr. Trump would turn out to be someone with whom they could talk and negotiate. That doesn't seem to be the case. And others had probably favored the same thing. The real question is, what does Mr. Netanyahu do? Mr. Netanyahu has everything he wants. This is his dream outcome. Will Mr. Netanyahu simply wait quietly until Iran finally counters the last Israeli strike? Or will he say, no, we're not going to wait? And historically, Israel hasn't. When it felt that it was threatened in any way, shape, or form, it is struck at its enemies. Well, in this case, they're already at war for all intents and purposes with everybody in the region. Why would they wait? So will Mr. Netanyahu, in fact, strike Iran? I don't know, but I think the situation is very explosive. And something's bound to happen between now and the 21st of January, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's it. I'm going to stop sharing it. We've already seen the part of the video between 11 minutes and 36 minutes. But that was the beginning of the video. And it really highlights, I think, the crisis that we're in and the risks that we're in. And I want to emphasize again, it's not only the fact that Congress, so much of Congress has been bought by AIPAC contributions, but we also have to note that the Adelson fortune substantially supports the activities, okay, of AIPAC. And in Trump's case, it wasn't simply that he was getting AIPAC contributions, but he was getting $100 million contribution, not to his campaign, that would be illegal, but $100 million contribution to Super PAC that was supporting him by Miriam Adelson. And so he owed her. Now, some people have said that she hasn't really paid the whole of the bill, that so far she's only made a $30 million contribution. She's holding out the other $70 million. I don't know that that's true. But anyway, Trump has clearly decided to pay her off by appointing Marco Rubio and Michael Waltz, okay, and Hegseth to 3 key positions in his administration, and all 3 appear to be linked comprehensively with the Zionists in Israel. And so the other parties to the conflict, the other nations in West Asia, are all coming together to resist what they see as a future war with the Israelis, and the United States continuing, of course, to support the Israelis. Okay, so there you have it. We are in a very serious situation of risk of war at this point, unless Trump plans to use these appointments as, simple window dressing, and intends to, go behind his Secretary of Defense, his Secretary of State, his National Security Advisor, to negotiate peace agreements with these other countries in opposition to Israel. I suppose there's always a possibility of that because of the loose cannon that Trump is. But certainly these appointments that he's made are not good signs from the standpoint of his claims to want to negotiate peace. Now, these people might not stand in the way of peace in Ukraine, but they certainly would stand in the way of peace in West Asia, and many of them would also stand in the way of peace with China as well. So we have to note that. Okay, any more comments, Dee?
Well, I have to say the big thing we're waiting for, as I've spoken about before, is the Iranian response. The Iran response, is a big factor. We'll see after Iran responds how the situation looks.
Yes, I think that comment is very important too, Dee, because if Iran's response is really tough, it may bring all these people face to face with the reality of Iran's capability. And when they see that particular reality, they may think twice about the escalation into a full-scale war with Iran. Of course, the Israelis will be in a full-scale war with Iran, and the existence of Israel will be threatened. But the question of whether we want to get involved to save Israel by fighting Iran, that will then come to the fore, and we will have to calculate what the likely cost of that is. And the likely cost of that is going to be, in the first instance, the destruction of the 68 bases we now have in the area surrounding Iran, and probably the destruction of most of our naval forces in that area too, because of course the Iranian missiles can easily knock out the naval assets we have, okay, in that area. And what are the American people going to think when we suddenly find that two of our carrier task forces are entirely knocked out? And since each of the carriers has roughly 5,000 sailors on it, that there are 10,000 sailors that we're trying to pick up in the waters around, the Middle East, and we don't have the naval forces there that can successfully pick them all up, so that we are incurring heavy casualties because of the wars up in Iran, both in the naval dimension and also in our bases in that area. I'm sure people here are not going to be pleased at that. Now, they might see red, and that might cause them to want to double down. But that, of course, is a non-rational response and extremely dangerous, because that will then bring us face to face with the nuclear capability of the Russians and the hypersonic capabilities, okay, of both Iran, okay, and Russia. Now, I notice we appear to have had a successful test of a hypersonic missile ourselves, but it is nowhere near production right now, and we can't reply, okay, with hypersonic missiles. Oh, and by the way, just the other day, there was a hypersonic missile fired by the Houthis, okay, in Israel, and the hypersonic missile, a single hypersonic missile. There weren't many. It was a single hypersonic missile, and it got through the THAAD air defense system and struck the Nevatim Air Base, okay, in Israel. That suggests, okay, that a THAAD system may not be capable of thwarting even a single hypersonic missile attack. What does that say about the capability of Iran to fire off hundreds of hypersonic missiles and altogether thousands of ballistic missiles at Israel, okay, at one time? Obviously, the THAAD system would be useless. The other air defense systems would be completely useless, and Israel would be naked before the missile attack, okay, of Iran. So Dee brings up an excellent point. People may well reevaluate everything based on the next attack of Iran on Israel, which, of course, we have been waiting for quite a long time, but it's supposedly in the works over the next few days or so.
Yes, it is.
So we may see this very quickly. So Lana says, I see 5 watching and 3 likes. Yeah, I see only 2 likes on my indicator up here. Lana says, Google says, quote, the Hegseth name is a Norwegian habitational name that comes from multiple farmsteads, unquote. Thank you, Lana. And Lana says, I want to know if Colonel McGregor is wearing a kilt, or if he wears it in battle at least. Forgive me, Kay, I have Outlander on my mind. But Colonel McGregor usually has the colors of his clan posted on the wall behind him somewhere. I frequently see those. He's very aware of his heritage from Scotland. I think that there were MacArthurs in Scotland, okay, and there were McGregors, okay, in Scotland, and I'm afraid Colonel McGregor probably has a great deal of identification with General MacArthur. That might at some point prove to be very inconvenient if he does get a position, if he does get, a high position, okay, in government. But in terms of the views he states, he is one of the best of the commentators on international affairs right now. Certainly the military dimension of international affairs and the specific issue of how we ought to reform our military here. And if you read his paper, what he has in mind is a total reformulation of our military posture, involving bringing our soldiers home, but cutting the overhead of the military considerably, and by implication, the expenditures on the military considerably as well. He wants to reduce the number of our generals at this point from 44 to 11. And he notes that during the Second World War, we had only 15 such generals. Now we have 44. I think he's specifically talking about 4 stars, if I recall correctly. I may not have that completely right, but you get the picture.
Mm-hmm.
He has in mind a restructuring, okay, of the Defense Department completely, and a great cutting of the overhead involved in that particular department. And for those who've been calling for a reduction in our defense costs, he has in mind reductions of hundreds of billions of dollars, and a reconstruction, okay, of our military to be most concerned with defense of our nation, okay, in this particular hemisphere. So I think that's important. Lana says, so he is a proud Klan member, yes. Also Galbraith. Yeah. Okay, I guess Galbraith is also comes from there too. Even says, I was being facetious about Hegseth. Wouldn't want to imagine him ascending from a witch killer. The witches were the victims. He would have had to be English, not but Norwegian. Okay, well, I'm glad we have that clear, Evelina. Okay, so let's go on to Ray McGovern's great piece, which I picked up, with the UN's review. I don't know, if it originated there. I can probably find that out. He might have originally published it at Consortium News, but let me see. Let me go to the end of it and see what it says. Yes, republished from Consortium News by permission of the author, or representative. So, will Gabbard be able to direct the intelligence community? You published this on November 14th, so it wasn't very long after the naming of Tulsi Gabbard, okay, as the Director of National Intelligence. President-elect Donald Trump's selection of Tulsi Gabbard. Okay, I should ask. Would you like to read this one, Dee?
No, you can read it. I've got snoring going on here.
Okay. Will Gabbard be able to direct the intelligence community? Okay. President-elect Donald Trump's selection of Tulsi Gabbard to be Director of National Intelligence, DNI, will cause shockwaves in and among the 18 fiefdoms that now comprise the U.S. intelligence community. Gabbard will be fighting an uphill battle if she tries to herd those 18 cats into a cohesive whole and restore integrity to intelligence analysis. The hill's incline will be still steeper if she takes seriously her duty to warn the president of the frequently noxious blowback of CIA covert actions, I cannot overcome the urge to quote from The Princess Bride, quote unquote, "Good luck storming the castle, Tulsi. Tulsi, it will take a miracle," unquote. In short, the odds are against her. Whether she succeeds depends first and foremost on how strongly the president backs her. Unlike most former DNIs, she has already demonstrated uncommon courage, as well as smarts and political skill. I couldn't agree more, with that assessment. The only thing I would differ with her on was her deciding to run against Bernie Sanders in 2020. I think if she had decided to endorse him and campaign for him, perhaps things would have been would have worked out in a different way in that campaign. But of course, the rigging was such that they still, might have worked out in the same way. But I think that had she supported Bernie in that campaign, she would have stayed a lot more popular in Democratic circles than she became. But then, of course, then she probably wouldn't be the director of national intelligence, at least the designee as director of national intelligence, as she is now. On the other hand, says Ray McGovern, she's had virtually no experience managing a large institution, much less a quote, community, unquote, well-versed in internecine warfare to protect individual rice bowls and populated with careerist bureaucrats, all too accustomed to telling the ultimate boss, the president, what he wants to hear. Important duties, the DNI is in charge of preparing the president's daily brief, the PDB, national intelligence estimates, and the annual threat assessment required by Congress. What is less well known is her role in covert action, a favorite of the CIA's clandestine service. I have to comment on this paragraph Cave raised. I think President Trump is famous for not wanting to hear, to listen to the president's daily brief. So even though she's in charge of preparing it, and even though I'm sure she's going to prepare it every day, I wonder if Trump is going to take the trouble to listen. Going on, Executive Order 12333, July 2008, stipulates, quote, Director of National Intelligence shall oversee and provide advice to the President and the National Security Council with respect to all ongoing and proposed covert action programs, unquote. Thus, what the executive order says, my own experience suggests that this covert action-related duty has been more honored in the breach than in the observance, so to speak. Director of Central Intelligence, William Colby, was, in my personal experience, the only director to give intelligence analysts a look at some covert action proposals and ask for comments. I served directly under Colby as an acting national intelligence officer in the mid-70s. Will DNI Tulsi Gabbard, assuming she's confirmed by the Senate, step up to this task? It would take uncommon courage, was the current DNI Avril Haines informed beforehand that the CIA would blow up the Nord Stream pipelines? If so, did she give it her blessing, or was she kept in the dark? Blowing up pipelines. My guess is that DNI Gabbard would have promptly recognized the folly in that CIA, quote, can do, unquote, attitude escapade and would have briefed the presidents on its longer-term implications. She's a good listener to analysts who she asks to brief her. I know that, too, from personal experience, responding to her questions when she was one of Hawaii's representatives in the House. It would take a courageous and politically astute person and strong backing and trust from the president for any DNI to be able to fulfill the duty to, quote, oversee and provide advice on covert action programs, unquote. And blowing off the analysts, sizable covert action programs require a sanity check from analysts with substantive expertise, as sad experience has shown. Recall the Bay of Pigs operation of April 1961 at President John F. Kennedy's request. Historian Arthur M. Schlesinger Jr. investigated this affair. His conclusion is set down in a memorandum for the president dated June 30th, 1961. It speaks for itself. Quote, the trouble with the Cuban Bay of Pigs operation, for example, was not that the intelligence and operations were combined, but precisely that the Cuban operation evaded systematic intelligence judgment. The intelligence branch, DDI, of the CIA was never informed of the existence of the Cuban operation. The Office of National Estimates was never asked to comment on the assumption. For example, that discontent had reached a point in Cuba where a successful landing operation would provoke uprisings behind the lines and defections from the militia. I gather that if its opinion had been invited, DDI would have given quite a different estimate of the state of opinion in Cuba from that on which the operation was based. The Bureau of Intelligence and Research of the Department of State knew even less about the Cuban operation, unquote. Yeah, once a long time ago, I did a paper for the Bureau of Intelligence and Research of the Department of State, but it wasn't about the Cuban operation at all. Anyway, DNI position, a creature, okay, of 9/11. As most are aware, there was enough intelligence available before 9/11 to prevent it. But the cats would not be herded. CIA would not share with FBI and vice versa. NSA would share with no one. Here's one account that will turn your stomach. The congressional oversight committees, as well as the administration and the intelligence community, were not only intent on covering up what had happened, but needed to make it appear that remedial action was being taken. And to the 9/11 Commission and its recommendations, here they said was the problem. George Tenet, as Director of Central Intelligence, head of the whole community, as well as the chief of the CIA, was overburdened. In fact, Tenet was the antithesis of an effective head of the intelligence community. He screwed up royally, but he also knew, quote, where the bodies were buried, unquote. Which key administration and congressional officials had been exposed to some of the disregarded intelligence. So it was not deemed safe to lay the blame where it clearly belonged. That is to say, on Tenet, right? And on some of the Congress officials who had been exposed to some of the disregarded intelligence. A fiction was devised. The problem was said to be that, quote, no one was in charge of the intelligence community, unquote. So the 9/11 Commission recommended that a new superstructure be created to coordinate the community and let no one be held accountable. On July 22nd, 2004, immediately after the 9/11 Commission report was released, I found myself, says Ray, with 9/11 Commissioner and former Senator from Washington, Slade Gorton, in the BBC Blue Room in Washington. I had the temerity to remind him that it was far from the case that, quote, no one was in charge, unquote, of the intelligence community, that Tenet had all the authority he needed. Gorton turned to me, smiled, and said, quote, of course, we know all that, but we in the Commission and the Congress just had to do something so the American people would see that we were doing something, unquote. Ray says, yuck. The National Intelligence Director and the newly created bureaucracy is what it is. Maybe Tulsi Gabbard can take the reins and make the community work. It will take a miracle. Let's hope for one. Any comments on that, Dee? Okay, I don't know if Dee can comment. I will certainly comment. Yeah. Okay, I think if anyone can herd the cats of the 18 fiefdoms, okay, of the intelligence community, it may well be Tulsi Gabbard. I think she does have the intelligence and she has the guts, okay, that are necessary to do that. But also speaking honestly, okay, it seems to me that it may well be a nearly impossible task. And to use a figure of speech, she might well break her sword on that particular task. But I, like Ray, wish her the best of luck. I would like nothing better than for her to be successful and to be able to give to the president intelligence that is realistic and that is accurate.
I think she's that type of person that, to the best of her ability, she would. I mean, she would give him a good report. She has that kind of balanced personality. And plus she always appears to be calm, and she thinks things through.
Yes.
I mean, it is a major task. Yes, I know that. Anybody in that position, it's a major task.
Yes, it's a major task. And she doesn't have that much staff as well. And having appreciable staff sometimes can really help you in situations like this. Gives you weight, inside of the bureaucracy. It gives you links to other parts, of the bureaucracy, so you can find out what's going on, in these other parts of the bureaucracy. People in the other parts of the intelligence community will be doing their best to hide things from her. And of course, she's going to have to ferret out what the truth is in all of the fiefdoms, okay, of the intelligence community. That is going to be difficult. Okay, I think Dee and myself and Ray McGovern, we all agree that Tulsi is intelligent and also courageous. And I would add, for a politician, unusually honest. But I think we all agree that it's going to be quite a task for her to be successful. Going to the comments again, Evelina laughed at something someone said. I'm not sure who it was or what. Lana said, I just like looking up the history of names. I noticed that. Lana's very good at it. Evelina says, speaking of witches, Tulsi would have definitely been burned at the stake. She's beautiful and smart. Well, I think she's already been probably figuratively burned at the stake by the Democratic Party. And I think that that was part of the reason why she had to defect to Trump, because people didn't like her honesty, didn't like her intelligence, and didn't like the fact that in backing Bernie in 2016, she betrayed the mainstream, of the party. At that time, they expected her to be kind of an heir apparent, to leadership in the party. But she was too honest to just sit there and to take it. She was very critical. And that's what led her to back Bernie in 2016. And after that, she was on the outs with the rest of the party and couldn't get anywhere in Congress. Lana says, Tulsi is a leader. I don't like her, but I give her that. One of the guys who used to report to her in the military told the story of how calmly and with skill and strategy she operates in a difficult situation. Evelina says, and hated by too many, birthmark streak is another telltale sign. Laugh out loud. Evelina says she would have had to cover her hair. Evelina says, sorry, the imagination runs wild. Lana says, a lot of people are taken in by Tulsi's pretty face. I think she's very phony. And I also think she can be dangerous, including rogue. Yeah, I have to agree with your assessment there as well. I think, I'm not going to say she's very phony all the time, but I'm going to say she can be phony. I think that in her getting in Trump's good graces, so she would be in position to have an appointment in his administration, that in that respect, she was very phony, because that was inconsistent with her previous opinions and statements. Her sucking up to Trump was not convenient with who we thought she was. And I think we have to be honest about that, certainly, as well. Okay, so I'm going to now go to the last of our pieces for tonight, unless you have a further comment, Dee?
No, I've got too much chaos here right now. I'm going to mute myself.
Okay. Okay. So Dee has a little chaos on the home front. So I will go to our final piece, which is by Alistair Crook, who graced us with a piece before Monday morning. What he usually does is give us one on Monday morning, but this time he gave us one on Friday afternoon. The headline is, there are no easy wars, quote unquote, left to fight, but do not mistake the longing for one. Interesting title. There's a picture of Trump with, the American flag behind him and the all-seeing eye, and he's striking that famous pose he struck with his fist in the air as he was bleeding from the shot to the ear that he took. The caption says, Trump may not appreciate just how isolated the U.S. and Israel are among Israel's Arab and Sunni neighbors. I think that's a very good observation. Israelis as a whole are exhibiting a rosy assurance that they can harness Trump, if not to the full annexation of the occupied territories. Trump in his first term did not support such annexation, but rather to ensnare him into a war on Iran. But many, even most, Israelis are raring for a war on Iran and an aggrandizement of their territory devoid of Arabs. They are believing the puffery that Iran, quote, lies naked, unquote, staggeringly vulnerable before U.S. and Israeli military strike. Trump's team nomination so far reveal a foreign policy squad of fierce supporters of Israel and of passionate hostility to Iran. The Israeli media term it a, quote, dream team, unquote, for Netanyahu. It certainly looks that way. The Israel lobby could not have asked for more. They have got it. And with the new CI chief, they get a known ultra-China hawk as a bonus. But in the domestic sphere, the tone is precisely the converse. The key nomination for, quote, cleaning the stables is Matt Gaetz as Attorney General. He is a real bomb thrower. And for the intelligence cleanup, Tulsi Gabbard is appointed as Director of National Intelligence. All intelligence agencies will report to her, and she will be responsible for the President's daily briefing. The intel assessments may thus begin to reflect something closer to reality. We can only hope. The deep interagency structure has reason to be very afraid. They are panicking, especially over Gates. Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy, what a great name, Ramaswamy, have the near impossible task of cutting out of control federal spending and currency printing. Oh, God. We don't print currency anymore, folks. Only 3% of the money supply is currency. Only 3%. Quit with the currency printing meme. It doesn't reflect actual reality. We do create money. And maybe some people may think that is out of control. But since we don't have any runaway inflation here, I would think that is certainly an indication that money creation is not completely out of control. But I know the inflation has been serious over a period of years. I don't mean to discount that. I feel the 30% pinch myself every week when I go shopping. I feel that. I feel that in the higher interest I pay also. I don't mean to minimize it, but what I'm saying is that historically and comparatively across nations, the inflation we had over those 2 to 3 years of COVID was nothing. It was nothing. It was nothing like what Turkey has had over a period of time. It's nothing like the Zimbabwe inflations or inflations we've had from time to time in South America. I mean, it would be generally considered to be a fairly stable currency across the world. That is the truth of it, historically speaking. Anyway, the system is deeply dependent on the bloat of government spending to keep the cogs and levers of the mammoth security boondoggle whirring. It is not going to be yielded up without a bitter fight. Well, I certainly agree there's going to be a bitter fight, and I certainly agree that the system is dependent on government deficit spending. Why is it dependent on deficit spending by the government? Because when the government spends into the non-government sector and doesn't tax away what it has spent, it is contributing wealth, net financial assets to the non-government sector. But whether that is bloat or not depends upon the kind of spending. It may not be bloat. It may be spending that is useful in bringing us a greater degree of equality in our society. It may not be inflationary. It depends on what we spend on. It depends on where the spending is and how the spending is met by supply, a matter that we have some control over. So going on. So on the one hand, the lobby gets a dream team, Israel. But on the other side, the domestic sphere, it gets a renegade team. This must be deliberate. Trump knows that Biden's legacy of bloating GDP with government jobs and excessive public spending is the real, quote, time bomb, unquote, that's awaiting him. Again, the withdrawal symptoms as the drug of easy money is withdrawn may prove incendiary. Moving to a structure of tariffs and low taxes will be disruptive. Of course, low taxes are disruptive because when you lower the taxes, that means that more money is kept in the non-government sector, doesn't it? If you move to a structure of higher taxes, that may cut off the appearance of cheap goods, from abroad. that could lead to inflation too. So both lower taxes and higher tariffs could lead to inflation here. But of course, what Trump is trying to do, supposedly, is to tame inflation. But is he really? Or is he just trying to pay off the people who contributed to his campaign? Going on. Whether deliberate or not, Trump is keeping his cards close to his chest. We have only glimpses of intent, and the water is being seriously muddled by the infamous, quote, interagency, unquote, grandees. For example, in respect to the Pentagon sanctioning private sector contractors to work in Ukraine, this was done in coordination with, quote, interagency stakeholders. The old nemesis that paralyzed his first term again faces Trump. Then, during the Ukraine impeachment process, one witness, Colonel Vindman, who, by the way, is now going to be a congressman in the new Congress. Yes, he was elected to Congress in Virginia. When asked why he would not defer to the president's explicit instructions, replied that whilst Trump has his view on Ukraine policy, that stance did not align with that of the, quote, interagency, unquote, agreed position. In plain language, Vindman denied that a U.S. president has agency in foreign policy formulation. That is a great observation and expression by Alistair Crook. In short, the, quote, interagency structure, unquote, was signaling to Trump that military support for Ukraine must continue. I think, though, Trump is probably going to be successful at stopping that support from continuing. When the Washington Post published their detailed story of a Trump-Putin phone call that the Kremlin emphatically states never happened, the deep structures of policy was simply telling Trump that it would be they who determine what the shape of the U.S., quote, solution, unquote, for Ukraine would be. I gotta say, I'm rooting for Trump in that respect. I am rooting for Trump when it comes to the deep state. Because the deep state is not part of our democracy. It's part of what is overturning it. Similarly, when Netanyahu boasts to have spoken to Trump and that Trump, quote, shares, unquote, his views regarding Iran, Trump was being indirectly instructed what his policy towards Iran needs to be. All the false rumors about appointments to his team, too, were but the interagency signaling their choices for his key posts. No wonder confusion reigns. So what can be deduced at this early stage? If there is a common thread, it has been a constant refrain that Trump is against war, and he demands from his picks personal loyalty and no ties of obligation to the lobby or the swamp. I think that is a common thread of what Trump actually thinks and what he is going to demand from his picks. It's going to be interesting if he could get that, because he has picked the wrong people to get that from. So is the packing of his administration with Israel firsters, unquote, indication that Trump is edging towards a, quote, realists Faustian pact, unquote, to destroy Iran in order to cripple China's energy supply source, 90% from Iran, and thus weaken China? Two birds with one stone, so to speak. Very great observation there, too, by Alistair. The collapse of Iran would also weaken Russia and hobble the BRICS transport corridor projects. Central Asia needs both Iranian energy and its key transport corridors linking China, Iran, and Russia as primary nodes of Eurasian commerce. And the RAND organization, the Pentagon think tank, recently published a landmark appraisal of the 2022 National Defense Strategy, NDS. Its findings were stark, an unrelentingly bleak analysis of every aspect of the U.S. war machine, In brief, the U.S. is, quote, not prepared, unquote, the appraisal argued, in any meaningful way for serious competition with its major adversaries, and is vulnerable or even significantly outmatched in every sphere of warfare. That's been a theme of the whole stream here tonight. It's what Doug McGregor thinks and what Danny Davis thinks. Obviously, it's what I think. For what it's worth, it's what Scott Ritter thinks. It's what dozens and dozens of people that I come into contact with each day through the internet, what they think. The U.S. Durand appraisal continues, could in short order be drawn into war across multiple theaters with peer and near-peer adversaries, and it could lose. It warns that the U.S. public has not internalized the costs of the U.S. losing its position as the world superpower. The U.S. must therefore engage globally with a presence, military, diplomatic, and economic, to preserve influence worldwide. Indeed, as one respected commentator has noted, the, quote, empire at all costs, unquote, cult, i.e. the RAND organization zeitgeist, is now, quote, more desperate than ever to find a war it can fight to restore its fortunes and prestige, unquote. And China would be altogether a different proposition for a demonstrative act of destruction in order to, quote, preserve U.S. influence worldwide, unquote, for the U.S. is, quote, not prepared, unquote, for serious conflict with its peer adversaries, Russia or China, Rand says. The straitened situation of the U.S. after decades of fiscal excess and offshoring, the backdrop to its current weakened military industrial base, now makes kinetic war with China or Russia, or, quote, across the multiple theaters, unquote, a prospect to be shunned. The point that the commentator above makes is that there are no, quote, easy wars, unquote, left to fight, and that the reality brutally outlined by Rand is that the U.S. can choose one and only one war to fight. Trump may not want any war, but the lobby grandees, all supporters, of Israel, and I should add, the lobby financiers, if not active Zionists supporting the displacement of Palestinians, want war, and they believe they can get one. Put starkly and plainly, has Trump thought this through? Have the others in the Trump team reminded him that in today's world, with U.S. military strength slipping away, there are no longer any, quote, easy wars, unquote, to fight, although Zionists believe that with a decapitation strike on Iran's religious and IRGC leadership on the lines of the Israel strike on Hezbollah leaders in Beirut, the Iranian people would rise up against their leaders and side with Israel for a, quote, new Middle East, unquote. Netanyahu has just made a second broadcast to the Iranian people, promising them easy salvation. He and his government are not waiting to ask Trump to nod his consent to the annexation of all occupied Palestinian territories. That project is being implemented on the ground. It is unfolding now. Netanyahu and his cabinet have the ethnic cleansing, quote, bit between their teeth, unquote. Will Trump be able to roll it back? How so? Or will he succumb to becoming, quote, genocide Don, unquote? This putative, quote, Iran war, unquote, is following the same narrative cycle as with Russia. Quote, Russia is weak, its military is poorly trained, its equipment mostly recycled from the Soviet era, its missiles and artillery in short supply. Quote, Zabig Brzezinski earlier had taken the logic to its conclusion on the Grand Chessboard in 1997. Russia would have no choice but to submit to the expansion of NATO and to the geopolitical dictates of the U.S. That was then, quote unquote, a little more than a year ago. Russia took the Western challenge and today is in the driving seat in Ukraine while the West looks on helplessly. This last month, it was U.S. retired General Jack Keane, the strategic analyst for Fox News, who argued that Israel's airstrike on Iran had left it, quote, essentially naked, unquote, with most air defenses, quote, taken down, unquote, and its missile production factories destroyed by Israel's 26 October strikes. Iran's vulnerability, Keane said, is, quote, simply staggering, unquote. Keane channels the early Brzezinski. His message is clear. Iran will be an, quote, easy war, unquote. That forecast, however, is likely to be revealed as dead wrong, says Alistair Crook. And if pursued, will lead to a complete military and economic disaster for Israel. But do not rule out the distinct possibility that Netanyahu, besieged on all fronts and teetering on the brink of internal crisis and even jail, is desperate enough to do it. His is, after all, a biblical mandate that he pursues for Israel. Iran likely will launch a painful response to Israel before the 20th of January presidential inauguration. Its riposte will demonstrate Iran's unexpected and unforeseen military innovation. What the U.S. and Israel will then do may well open the door to wider regional war. Sentiment across the region seethes at the slaughter in the occupied territories and in Lebanon. Trump may not appreciate just how isolated the United States and Israel are among Israel's Arab and Sunni neighbors. The U.S. is stretched, though so thin, and its forces across the region are so vulnerable to the hostility that the daily slaughter incubates that a regional war might be enough to bring the entire house of cards tumbling down. The crisis would pitch Trump into a financial crisis that could sink his domestic economic aspirations. Too. Well, of course, I disagree with the final point because if Trump looks around for solutions to any financial crisis, he will find the solutions in the MMT approach to economics, and there won't be any collapse of the financial house of cards here. There may be a collapse that starts, but the federal government has the financial power to stop any such collapse if it uses the fiscal power that it has and the power to create money that it has and the power to spend on things that increases productivity here in this country. All these can be brought to bear to stop any financial crisis here. So I don't think that crisis is going to pitch us into a financial crisis we cannot handle. But I do think that crisis in West Asia is going to lead to our expulsion from West Asia as a power that has any influence there. That's what is likely to happen. I think we won't be welcome in West Asia any longer, and we won't have any influence to speak of in West Asia any longer. And the Chinese and the Russians will be able to proceed with their plans before Brisk, and we will find ourselves retreating to Fortress America.
I agree with you 100%.
Well, thank you. Okay, I don't know there are many people who would agree with me 100%. So you are in a select group, D.
Okay.
Okay, to go to the comments. Evelina says Tulsi's husband's name is Abraham. Interesting, I didn't know that. But I thought Tulsi's husband, well, okay, I don't know much about Tulsi's husband, so I won't say anything. Evelina says, what's in a name? Anyway, I'll shut up. Please, you don't have to shut up. We enjoy your comments here. Lana says, Twitter suspended my account because of responding to Vivek, quote, go ahead and shoot yourselves in the foot, unquote. Re-fed spending cuts flagged, okay, as violence. Shake my head. AI fail. It is an AI fail. I mean, shooting yourselves in the foot doesn't connote violence. Okay, what it connotes is self-defeating action. Self-defeating action, but it's not really a violent metaphor or in any way advocating violence. So, what it does exhibit is the stupidity of AI. I don't know if AIs will always be stupid, but today they are very often stupid. And they certainly were in Lana's case. Lana says, we are ruining our influence all over. The U.S. is cocky and obnoxious, and other countries are sick, okay, of our the sick, okay, of our bullying. Okay. And by the way, it's not so much that the people of the U.S. are cocky, and obnoxious, but what it is that the way our political campaigns happen to work out and the way the narratives come forward, they lead, okay, to the victories, okay, of presidents who appoint people who are cocky, okay, and obnoxious. The problem is not so much with the people of the United States, it's with the elites in the United States. I mean, the people have other problems, and this figures into the elites we choose, certainly. In other words, the people who voted against Paris on grounds that the Biden administration had performed absolutely terrible and was complicit in the genocide. Certainly their opposition facilitated the victory of Trump. I don't think it was a key factor. Maybe it was a key factor in Michigan, but even if Trump had lost Michigan, he still would have had a majority, in the Electoral College. It would have been something like, how many electoral votes are in Michigan? 14 or 15. So he still would have won by 297 to 241 or something like that, or 242. Okay, it would have been closer. But still, to stay home on grounds of that was a counterproductive action, because Trump had been signaling throughout the whole campaign that he was likely to be worse in relation to Israel-Gaza compared to Kamala. Now, Kamala was obviously shutting her mouth because she didn't want to fight, with the administration. I think that was a strategic mistake, but to infer that her policies would have been the same as the administration goes too far. We just don't really know that. Anyway, Lana says, the percentage around the world is what I mean, Marie, United States, not you and I, and most Americans. Yeah, perception, not percentage. Yeah. Lana says, my fear the whole time was that people would just stay home and not bother to vote. And yeah, that's what happened. In other words, as the final votes come in, we see that Kamala got more votes than we thought, and less people stayed home than we thought had stayed home 4 or 5 days ago. But it still looks like maybe 10 million people stayed home as compared with Biden's totals. And that was the difference in what Trump ended up with. I think it's still true that Trump still hasn't equaled the vote total he got in 2020 as of now. But as more votes come in, he is gaining more votes. But we're near the end of the vote counting process now. So we'll soon see what the total was. Okay, and final. Okay, any more comments, Dee?
I really don't have any more comments.
Okay, did you like the Alistair Crook article?
Yes, I did. Yes, I did.
It was really something, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he's just a great commentator.
And I think on everything we talk about, when we talk about West Asia, we talk about China, we talk about it, when we talk about just the whole region and everywhere, the vital, the vital issue right now, before Trump gets in office, as we stated earlier, is the Iran response. That is crucial.
Well, yes, I think that's crucial too. I've been saying so for weeks.
Yes.
And I've been anticipating it for weeks.
Yes, and I think too, Iran is watching. They're paying attention. They've had their meetings. So they're really seeing by the appointments and the communication that's going on in, the US, where Trump stands or where they perceive Trump stands. And that all is going to play into their response.
Yes, it is going to play into their response. There was a comment from Lana just now saying, I didn't realize it was still counting votes. Okay, I bet a lot of people don't. Yeah, I think a lot of people don't. But just to talk about the results in the House, okay, right now, and then I'll close. 218 votes in the House, okay, for the Republicans. Okay, so that's a majority. However, 3 people were selected by Trump for his campaign that are going to be pulled out of the House. Stefanik and Gates, okay, and Waltz. Okay. Those 3 people won their House races. So that's going to bring down, okay, the GOP total to 215. There are 5 races not yet called. There's one in Ohio, okay, where Marcy Kaptur has a thin lead in her race with 99%, okay, of the votes in. She has a thin lead. I think she's probably going to maintain that thin lead. But the point is, they're still counting votes, okay, in Ohio. That race would bring the Democrats up to 213, okay. In the area of what were originally perceived to be toss-up seats, Mary Peltola in Alaska, who is a congresswoman now, is behind one of the Begich family in Australia. I think it's Mark Begich. 46.1% to 48.7%, with 98%, okay, of the vote in. But that 98% of the vote is not reflective of some of the early votes and mail-in votes which have not been counted yet. And reportedly, the votes that have not been counted yet but come from the Alaskan native areas of that state. And those are the people who vote overwhelmingly for Peltola. So even though she's behind now by 2.1%, she still could easily catch up, okay, and win there for the Democrats. Okay, also in the California 13th, somebody by the name of Gray, I don't know his or her first name, is running against the incumbent, who is Duarte. Duarte is ahead by 50.6% to 49.4%. So that's a margin of 1.2% in favor of the Republican. But only 86% of the vote is in. There's still 14% of the vote to be counted there. The California 45th, there's a dead tie. Somebody whose last name is Tran is opposing somebody named Steele. I'm not sure who's the incumbent here. I believe Steele is the incumbent, but I'm not sure. That vote is recorded as 50-50 right now, a dead tie with 94% of the vote in. Now, I think the Democrat, Tran, has a good chance in the California 45th. There's a good chance that 6% of the vote still out is going to go for the Democrats. There's a recount that's been called, okay, in Iowa, where Christy Bochanan, I think her first name is Christy or Christine, is running against somebody by the name, okay, of Miller Meeks. Now, Miller Meeks is the incumbent in that race, but the incumbent is only ahead by 50.1% to 49.9%. That's 0.2%. There's 99% okay, of the vote in, but there are enough votes still uncounted that they've called for a recount, okay, in this race. If the Democrat wins, okay, the recount, then, well, if the Democrats win all these races, okay, what it amounts to is that the GOP will have won 218 races, and the Democrats 217 races. But the GOP will have 3 victories subtracted from it. So that when once the designees of Trump are appointed, and he's trying to get them all appointed in the first week of his presidency, suddenly the Democrats will have control of the House by 217 to 215. Or it could even be 216 to 216. Could be a dead tie. So that neither party will have control of the House. They'll have to dicker for control of the House. So the victory in the House for the GOP by only 1 vote looks very unstable right now because of Trump's own appointments. I don't know if the Democrats will win all 5 of the outstanding seats. But even if they win, let's say, 3 seats and the Republicans win 2 of those seats, that will be a margin of 220 to 215. But again, 3 of the Republicans will be leaving, so that's only 217 to 215. How the hell is Mike Johnson going to retain control of the House with only a margin of 2 votes, and with the Freedom Caucus constantly harassing him because he isn't tough enough in various areas? It's going to be very, very hard for him to maintain control. In other words, there's going to be chaos, okay, in the House. And I think, we can anticipate that. And as Lana said, the vote counting is still going on. We are not finished with it yet. So there we are. Have you any final comments for tonight, Dee?
I think we covered enough, and I think, like I said, we've said several times, we're just waiting for the Iran attack to response to put everything else in perspective.
I completely agree. on that note, on that note, let us say good night. Okay, I expect you may have a show on Sunday and Monday.
Yes, on Sunday evening, Madeline and I are going to have a show together.
Okay. And on Monday evening?
Not too sure about Monday. We'll take that by ear, as they say.
Okay. I will play by ear myself, but I will certainly be back on Tuesday. Okay, with another show, on international relations. And I have a special show planned for Tuesday. I'm going to go over, the Doug McGregor 57-page paper on Tuesday in depth.
Okay, that sounds interesting.
Because I believe that is really, really important for the future of the military here in the United States.
Yeah,
So
that
thank
sounds
you
like a
all.
really good show.
But thank you all for coming. And I will certainly see you on Tuesday. I may see you before then.
Yes.
And of course, I'm sure we'll both see you before then if the Iranians attack.
Yes, we will. We will
Well,
be covering that.
We'll be covering that in spades.
Hmm. Yeah, I was going to say too, please buy Joe a coffee. He has go. I see that www.buymeacoffee.com Joe.Firestone.
Yes, or please make a contribution to my Patreon account. Keep in mind that I know Patreon is set up so that it's on a subscription basis, but you can easily go there, get a subscription, make just a single contribution, and then cancel the subscription. That would work as a single contribution.
Mm-hmm.
So please go to one of those two accounts, and I'll appreciate whatever contributions you can make.
Yes, help Joe and Bonnie. These are hard times.
These are hard times, and especially hard times for people who have outrun their pensions and are primarily living on Social Security. Anyway, thank you all, and we will see you in the coming days.
Yes, thank you and good night, everyone.
Okay,
Good night, Bonnie.
Good night. Okay, with very exciting shows.
Yes.
Because these are very exciting times.
I agree.
Okay, good night, Dee, and thank you very much for coming aboard tonight. It was a
You're
pleasure
welcome.
to have you.
I enjoyed being here. Thank you and good night.
Good night. Good night. And good night, everyone.